Welcome back to the third video in this series where I am showing you how I created my subwoofer fiberglass enclosure. Once the fourth fiberglass layer and resin was thoroughly cured, I took a marking pen, actually from a dry whiteboard, and I marked the area generally where I'm going to cut the excess fiberglass that I don't want off of my mold. As I don't possess a Dremel tool, I took my standard handheld grinder and attached a 1mm cutting disc and cut the fiberglass shape out like this, and it worked very well. In these following three images, you can see when it was completely cut out using the 1mm cutting disc. I then took 80 grit sandpaper and went around all the edges and the outside with a light sanding just to take off the sharp edges and any bits of fiberglass that were sticking out. Now, to cut the speaker rings, I don't have a Jason circle jig, so after watching numerous videos on how to make your own, I decided to use a piece of 4mm masonite. I removed the black plastic base plate from my router and placed that on the piece of masonite, and then marked out the holes for the machine screws. I used a 58mm hole cutting circle saw, as you can see here, to cut the main area out of the piece of masonite where the router bit would show through. On attaching the masonite circle jig to the bottom of the router, I only used 2 of the machine screws, as this held the piece of masonite reasonably firm in place. So I've cut 2 speaker rings. The violet one, or purple one you see here, is the one that's actually I'm going to attach the speaker to, and the orange one is going to cause it to be flush mounted. So what I did was I measured the diameter of my speaker and then divided that by 2 to give me the radius, and I added about 1.5 mils to that to give me a gap for the actual carpeting to be wrapped around the wood and under the speaker. Now, when measuring that radius onto the masonite circle jig from the very outside of the router bit to the center of the hole for the 3mm drill bit. Here you can see my markings before I actually drilled the 3mm holes and started routing. So after drilling a 3mm hole into my MDF, I then inserted the drill bit into the hole and positioned my circle jig over that, and which held it in place very well. I cut through the MDF in increments of about 4 instead of putting a lot of strain on the router and cutting through once or twice. I did it in about 4 steps. I always left a tab on either end. I didn't cut right through the entire circle. This holds the workpiece in place, so you can cut both the inner and the outer holes, and then your ring will just drop out after you've used a hacksaw blade to cut through those little tabs. I then took 80 grit sandpaper and sanded the leftover bits of wood after I cut the tabs through so that they were flush with the speaker rings. Now, to cut the outer circumference of the orange ring, this time I measured from the inside of the router bit to the center of the 3mm drill bit. The same applied when I was cutting the purple ring. When I wanted to cut the inner circle, I would measure from the outside of the router bit to the center of the 3mm drill bit. Cutting the outer circle of the blue ring, I then measured from the inside of the router bit to the center of the drill bit. Here are the finished rings cut out. I also used a 1/2 inch corner round bit to give a soft edge to the flush mount ring, so that when I do pull the cloth over and stretch it down to the actual mold, it won't have a sharp edge. Here are the 2 rings placed on top of each other. You'll notice here that the bottom ring is slightly smaller than the top ring. This was an error on my part. When I measured to cut the outer circumference of the bottom ring, instead of measuring from the center of the 3mm drill bit to the inside of the router bit, I measured to the outside of the router bit. So I actually cut off an extra 10mm all the way around. This didn't actually make much of a difference, but just keep this in mind when you are cutting your circles. To fix the two rings together, and as I don't have a brad nailer, I drilled pilot holes and then screwed the two rings together with drywall screws. As you can see, I clamped them in place, they wouldn't move. Then I unscrewed them and I placed some wood glue onto both and refit them down using the screws to hold everything in place, and of course clamped it down again until it was dry. And just to see how it looked with the subwoofer driver in place, I used a bit of press stick just to hold the rings up against the speaker, and then took these couple of photos to get an idea of how it will look when it's flush mounted. I hope these videos are or will help you with your own project. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.